It's been 30 years since the deregulation of broadcasting in Nigeria to allow for private participation. The regulation of the broadcast media commenced in 1992 when the National Broadcasting Commission was set up by the Ibrahim Babangida administration. This move brought an end to state and federal government monopoly. Since then, the NBC has given licenses to several private TV and radio organizations. The deregulation of the broadcast media set in motion genuine competition for supremacy and survival of the fittest among old as well as new operators in the broadcast industry. This brought hope for rapid development of the industry through modernization and accessibility to a wide reach of information for both media professionals and the public, which would not have been made possible if the government was still in control of the media. For the first time since independence, Nigerians had access to unbiased information on matters pertaining to national development and government activities, and an array of alternative stations to meet their viewing or listening needs. But the regulation has also come with its own challenges in the broadcast industry, which include poor funding, owing of staff salaries, digital switchover, internet incursion, inadequate training of broadcast professionals, as well as the politicization of the broadcast media. Even the NBC has been in the eye of the storm with the government's decision to have it regulate social media platforms. Fines recently issued to Trust TV and other media houses for the airing of a documentary on bandits in the Northwest, thereby creating a buzz nationwide, and most recently, the ban on stations owing license renewal fees. There's now a call also for government bailout or low taxation of broadcast organizations because of the critical role that they play in nation building. What lies ahead for Nigeria's broadcast industry and its regulator? We'll have broadcast professionals to help us understand the sector. I'm Sumner Sambo, and this is the Arise interview. A very warm welcome. The National Broadcasting Commission is marking its 30 years of its existence and, of course, the regulation of the Nigerian broadcast industry. Since the broadcast media was deregulated in 1992, several private radio and television stations have been given licenses to operate in Nigeria. The deregulation of the broadcast media gave Nigerians access to unbiased information on national issues and government activities, as well as several alternative stations to choose from, including alternative views within the polity. The anniversary is coming on the heels of the criticism of the NBC for sanctions against Trust TV, the BBC, and of course others for airing a documentary on bandits in the Northwest, and most recently the ban on stations owing license renewal fees, even though this has since been suspended. What's the future for broadcasting in Nigeria in the midst of the incursion by online streaming and other forms of internet broadcasting, or multicasting as it's known now? Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by former Director General of the National Broadcasting Commission, who was also a key player within the broadcast industry, both in terms of government and private sector, Dr. Danladi Bako. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we will be having, joining us from Lagos, the Ace broadcaster, seasoned sports commentator, and the Africa president of the International Sports Press Association, Mitchell Obi. He will be joining us later on the program. So good to have you here. And
thanks.
Not many Nigerians will understand, especially the younger generation, that it used to be only the NTA, FRCN, and of course, before we used to have the Western Nigeria Broadcasting Service, before eventually everything was brought into the purview of the NTA and of course the FRCN. Then, just take us through this historical part for broadcasting in Nigeria, and then eventually the deregulation in 1992, and what that meant for the broadcast industry.
Well, in summary, thank you very much, Sumner, and good evening, Nigerians and everybody else who are watching Arise TV all over the world. In summary, as far back as 1932, there was what was called the Redivision Service in Nigeria. Not too many people had access. You go to P&T, they draw a line, like a telephone line, to your house and give you a small box that had a speaker, so you could pick up signals of what was being transmitted in England. And all over the world, they chose what you, so it was called Redivision. That was 1932. gradually, as the nationalist movements, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Obafemi Awolowo, Ahmadu Bello, created the buzz for nationalism using the media, especially the newspaper West African Pilot, which Nnamdi Azikiwe formed, and all the other 1949 Tribune newspapers. It was necessary for radio and TV to become much more integrated in national development. And so the first television station in 1959 was by WNBS, NTV in Ibadan, which Chief Obafemi Awolowo worked hard to build. He was followed also by Ahmadu Bello, Sir Ahmadu Bello, who built Radio Nigeria Kaduna, Radio Television Kaduna, RTK, Broadcasting Corporation of Northern Nigeria in 1962. So as far back as 59, we had radio and TV, then 62 in the north, radio and TV in Ibadan, radio and TV in Kaduna, and gradually the rest of the regions picked up. Remember that time it was Eastern region, Northern region, Western region.
Yeah.
And so those are the three component parts of Nigeria. So each of the premiers started building up their own. By the time General Yakubu Gowon created 12 states, it was obvious that each state could now begin to make their own acquisition of broadcasting materials, radio and TV. And so most of the states started getting their own. So you had Benue Plateau Television, you had Sokoto Niger Television, you had all these television stations and radio stations. And so it evolved like that until 1977 through Decree 24. Government amalgamated all these stations to make the NTA. And the NTA became the television, or Radio Nigeria became the Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria. And so that came down to the point where those of us that were in the media, those of us that were alive and to our responsibilities, started advocating for deregulation of broadcasting as it is done all over the world. And those of us who are student activists in ABU and all that, we had heard multiplicity of voices.
Yeah,
we didn't think that voices should be restricted to government.
Especially with the coming of the CNNs in the 80s, it had broadened the space globally.
By 81, I had, out of one of my vacations in England, I had seen CNN. And I was amazed that they allowed that kind of multiplicity of voices and democratization of the airspace. So people put input. Way back, government spoke down to you. But I was one of the advocates that you must be able to talk back to government, either through writing letters back to government. Some newspapers have letter to the editor.
Yeah,
so
that feedback mechanism.
Some feedback mechanism. And we insisted on all that. And it turned out that during my days on Morning Ride, I advocated from 1988, I advocated almost every weekend for deregulation of broadcasting. So
yeah, I'm sorry, just before you continue, a lot of, when you don't say casually Morning Ride, a lot of people will not understand that this was then like the first flagship TV breakfast show that came up. And I mean, on NTA, almost everyone wanted to catch a glimpse of it. It was live, it was innovative. I mean, lots of intuition going into that program, and you were the chief producer of that program.
Thank you very much.
Why did you eventually decide to bring it in to make it different from what was the norm then?
Let me put it like this. By 1979, I was employed on grade level 8. I had finished university 1978. Before then, every of my vacations, I was either in radio or TV. I had started as an announcer reporter in 1973. In Radio Nigeria Kaduna, then 3 months later, Radio Nigeria Sokoto. So by the time I was graduating, I had knowledge of, and because I was traveling abroad very regularly, I saw Sir David Frost, most of the big guys on, and I felt that there was a need for us to stop. Way back, your parents or my parents would come on and put on the TV at 4 o'clock.
Yeah,
you see color bars,
with the color bars
and the Sesame Street, and Rebinsa Ayara, Children's Time. By 11:30, you shut down. We that had the privilege of watching international media organizations, we knew that you could run 24 hours. And I said to myself, we must start breakfast TV. So in 1987, I created Morning Ride, and I was the first producer. And meanwhile, I was a staff of network service of NTA. I was supervising on grade level 13. I was supervising other productions. So I did morning ride during my extra time. I was already an administrator. So it was an administrative capacity. I was controller programs, network, 1987. But because of my desire to change the format of news presentation, I decided that news presentation in NTA was, with all due respect to my seniors, boring. I thought it was linear. It was press releases, and I wasn't going to be part of it. So I waited for Morning Ride, created Morning Ride, where you could have opposition voices. I brought Jibril Aminu to the studio. Yeah. I brought Taisho Lari with his shot maker. Yeah. I brought Guru Maharaji. People that ideally the station of a federal station would not encourage to be on air because they were considered to be anti-establishment.
The leftists.
The leftists. So, and I was radical. The day I put Fela on air, I almost got a query. And what was my fault? That I put Fela on air, interview with Fela. The day I put, there were radicals. Allow Akabashoron, president of NBA at that time.
Then.
It was in 1988 I put, when you had a military regime and you had CLO, Civil Liberties Organization, in a military regime, so I was the one that took a risk to put Olisa Agbakoba on air to talk about civil liberties when there's a military regime that was considering all such things. So I did all of those things because I felt that the format of news reporting in NTA and FRCN were boring, very linear, predictable, uneventful, lack of intuition, lack of initiative. So I created the alternative, and people were hungry.
And that eventually gave birth, I mean, just in a couple of years, by 1990, there was this steam everywhere for, you know, the test of private broadcasting. And in 1992, the pressure was so much on then military head of state, Ibrahim Babangida, to actually ensure that that sector was deregulated. And then came the deregulation of the broadcast industry in 1992. Tell us about that.
1987, at ASCON, Administrative Staff College, Badagry, some eggheads, professors of mass communication, Ralph Akinfele, Luke Uche, Tony Momo, Sam Oyobare, they were all gathered in ASCON to do a draft policy on mass media and deregulation. And after that conference, Babangida ensured that he followed it through and ensured that for us to be able to deregulate, you must have a regulator. If by the time you're going to give a license to private operators, you must have a standing rules of operation and engagement. And so that's how we created the regulatory body. Everywhere where every department, every structure in the system that allows private ownership, whether it's airlines, whether it's whatever, whether it's petroleum, there has to be a regulator that makes sure that there's a balance and a code of conduct. And that's what happened. So August 24, 1992, decree number 38 was promulgated, and it established and allowed private operators to have licenses to operate. And Dr. Tom Adaba was appointed Director General.
Yeah, the Pioneer Director General.
Yes, Pioneer Director General. And he built the foundation. And Professor Sam Oyobare came in from ABU as one of the advisors of President Babangida, became Minister of Information, and superintended over that capacity of who and who should get licenses and how those licenses should operate. So that's how we found ourselves with those licensees at that time. Those early licenses included Raymond Dokpesi, John Momo, and a few others.
Clapperboard TV.
Clapperboard TV, exactly.
Okay, I just want you to take us through the mind of General Babangida then. The idea of opening up the broadcast industry within the military government. I mean, anytime I think of it, he was so ahead of his time. And then you think of it, was it because of the need to have mass understanding? That's why he had to bring this deregulation, including institutions like MAMSA then, you know, which was for social mobilization, with Professor Jerry Ghana eventually heading it at some point. And when you see some of those institutions that he set up, what exactly was his thinking? I mean, under a military government.
I had the privilege of covering the State House, the Dodon Barracks, as not just as a reporter, no, not as a reporter, but as a producer who superintended over Better Life for Rural Women, IMF debate, so I had access. So I went regularly. I did all those broadcasts you saw about IMF conditionalities, IMF loans and all that stuff on TV, or those debates. I did all of those things. Now, I had that privilege to be able to discuss with him, and on quite a few occasions, to be fair to him, and Chief Bruro Nabule that died recently, they gave support to those who were interested in becoming media owners. But he was careful to ensure that he advised that it should not be used against the government. But I think he knew also that the first 9 licensees were people who were not likely. It was an experiment, it was a pilot.
Critical voices, actually.
Yes.
When you look at those people who got those licenses.
Yes,
actually.
so just look through. You might not see, the public might not see, but those of us that were close, we knew that they were conventional, conformist people. Even Tommy Kimi had a license. Babangida himself had triple heritage. So Babangida understood at that time that the negative vibes that he was getting as a benevolent dictator could be assuaged by allowing friendly media owners to periodically criticize, but generally on a level support him.
And that's what happened. The superstructure is still in existence.
Exactly. And so when they appointed Peter Enahoro as the chairman of the board, Peter Enahoro wasn't going to rock the boat. Dr. Tom Adaba was not a radical. He wasn't going to rock the boat. He's not in the mold of Bala Usman or Wang Metuge or Escotoyo. No, they're good people. Then even the licensees, John Momo, Raymond Dokpesi, etc., or Sa Adun DBN, they were not going to rock the boat.
But then you've touched a very key part of this discussion. We had licensees who were given these licenses, but eventually they didn't have the monies to take off. Yeah. Many of them, it took a longer period of time before they could actually start their stations. Tell us that.
I had always told them, right from the early stages, that before you apply for a license, do a market survey. What do the viewers or listeners want to hear? Without doing all that, what is the capital outlay of what you need? If you invest, there are licensees who got a license, paid the license fee, and spent 100 million on infrastructure of the station. So it was going to take them 4 years to break even. There are others also who bought a transmitter, 35 million, 10-year-old transmitter, all the other things. Before you know it, they spent only just about their own building, maybe 16 million extra. So with 46 million, they set up a station. So they could break even faster than those who went decorating the place and doing flowers and doing story buildings. And there's one in Delta. He spent money doing an infrastructure. Those monies he has spent. There's another one in Port Harcourt that spent 250 million to set up a station, whereas he needed just about 70 million to set up that station. So they won't break even. That's the first part. That's one of the reasons why you don't break even. The second part is that you don't do productions to suit yourself. So somebody stays in his house. This is what he wants to see on TV. So he thinks that the whole public would appreciate it.
That same thing.
Yes. Meanwhile, Sumna, there's a set of people, advertisers. They're almost like a cabal. They decide whether to send you Maggi or food specialties or Hapik or MTN. Those people would love the programs that they think from their market survey people are watching. Different from what
especially
they
that
like.
era that we had several soap operas and all of that, locally produced, and of course the Mexican ones and all of that.
So sometimes those advertisers even prefer to sponsor those soaps because the women are watching those soaps and the women buy Maggi. The women. So
okay.
because of that, because of poor strategy, poor preparation, people take licenses, they don't know how to go about it, so they wake up 3 years down the line, they cannot pay their bills because their program content, what they produce and air, is substandard. It's not in tune with what will give you adverts.
In tune with market realities.
Market realities.
Even audience
even
realities.
research.
Well, I'll just ask you to hold on there. We'll now go on this short break, and when we come back, the conversation continues on the deregulation of the Nigerian broadcast industry 30 years after. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Somna Sambo, and of course we're discussing the deregulation of the Nigerian broadcast industry. I still have with me in the studio former Director General of the National Broadcasting Commission and is journalist himself, a broadcaster of repute, Dr. Danladi Bako. And of course joining us from Lagos is broadcaster, seasoned sports commentator, and the Africa President of the International Sports Press Association, Michel Obi. So good to have you join us, Michel. And of course, we've been listening to Dr. Danladi Bako here from the perspective of the government and of course how eventually the broadcast industry was deregulated. But I want you to give us an insight from that of a broadcast professional. I mean, not so many Nigerians would remember that we used to have only one broadcast network in terms of television, the Nigerian Television Authority, and then of course when it had to do with radio, the Federal Radio Broadcasting Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria, as it's now known, FRCN. Just tell us from the perspective of a broadcast professional, how was it like then in those days before the broadcast industry was deregulated in 1992?
Thank you, Sambo, and my due regards to the Koguna of Sokoto, Danladi. It's good to hear his voice once more, a voice that was constant, especially from the background, shouting and screaming and getting all of us to really get on with the business of bringing joy to people at home. And so it was those days. But how time flies. 3 years, 30 years, 3 decades. And you want to ask what has changed or what is even changing. But the good thing is we have experiences to tell. And I'm really delighted to be part of this anniversary of a private initiative that took root at a time when very few really wanted to be involved. But those who ventured, I'm glad to say today that they are still showing their light, and it's good to know that even the first radio station still has the ray of followership, and even television. The stars are still gathering when you talk about Galaxy TV. So it's good to be one who really was involved from the scratch, not only carrying blogs to set up a station, but also getting into the studio to really bring to Nigerians what it takes to find a fresh dimension. And you look at some of the dimensions. You talk the days of analog, now we go digital, and it's still changing. So as one involved, I think it's an experience that perhaps has guided us, and it's not been really profitable, I must tell you. Getting involved in private broadcasting has not been a profitable venture for many. From the outside, it seems as if there is really a haven of riches, but come to think of it, it's capital intensive. The manpower demands also very high, especially going for the kind of professionals you need to give the people what they want. And then the competition has grown. It's beginning to get even fiercer over time. And that's why perhaps the viewer now is king. And people talk about content. I think content was the issue, was not the big issue when we started, but then it has been taking a different role at this stage. 30 years of private broadcasting, one can say that blessings can be counted, but then challenges are still manifold. And I think that's the picture I have, a picture of how individuals use their initiative to really bridge a gap which was not very well known. The literature on private broadcasting was not as deep as it is now. And beyond all of that, you had individuals who had the money, they came into it thinking it was like business as usual. But when they started getting into the real nitty-gritty, as they say, the brass tacks of private broadcasting, you needed to be multi-talented or multi-hooked. First, you had to have the connection, trying to get the advertising, trying to get the equipment, and also trying to balance forces with the Broadcast Commission, which are the regulator. Indeed, they were the big guide. When they came on board 30 years ago today, it was like you needed to be on the alert. Vigilance was the word, lest you really get outside the fold, and that meant something.
Okay. Very interesting perspective there, Mitchell. Now, talk to us about broadcast professionals. How easy has it been getting a job under this regime of deregulated broadcast media compared to what it used to be like in those days, whereby it was just blue-black? I mean, either you are NTA or you are in FRCN, and until maybe state broadcast corporations started springing up here and there. What will you say is the atmosphere like for those who are graduates of mass communication, those who have interest in broadcasting and have trained themselves to be that way at the moment? Was the market like, the opportunities like, compared to what it used to be in those days?
You will say that the openings have increased. Yes, there is a choice, but then the employment is not as guaranteed as it was in the days past, or the days of yore, where you could be assured of your salary. But here it's a question of how do you perform? How, as a business model, you wanted to look at viability. You have to look at how you create value. And as a professional involved in the business, if you can't really deliver, it's difficult to stay. Some people who started the business went all out, following the old model of employing so many people, but then with time they realized that what was coming in couldn't really get to match what they needed to sustain the business. And beyond that, it's the question of opening up for some of the young ones who came from different schools of mass communication. I think that now they have opportunities to really get to practice the art. And of course, there's been a drastic or radical change in the way private broadcasting has taken shape. Now you have a specialization, so broadcasters have the opportunity now to go to where they can find their strength, where their DNA is best suited, and that is perhaps is an advantage or a benefit that you can really count. You talk these days about stations that focus on music, stations that go on politics, the news, and of course sports. And so you have professionals from all these segments really getting involved in the business, but then getting them to really get the kind of remuneration, it's a tough one. And that's why outside of this fair, it's really better to hire those who come, do their job, go away, than really getting them to stay and be paying salaries.
Interesting perspective you've got here. Then I come back to you, Dr. Danladi Bako here. Let's talk about what Mitchell pointed out. Some of these licenses who got these licenses from the National Broadcasting Corporation thought it was going to be like, maybe like the telecoms operators who in 2001 got their licenses, and many of them are smiling to the banks. And we haven't had some of those licenses breaking even, while others have broken even, and then they've even diversified. And then, of course, with the introduction of digital broadcasting, they are beginning to expand, and of course online streaming is beginning to come in, and they are beginning to diversify within the era of broadcasting, which is now known as multicasting. In all of this, how will you say that the licensees can make maximum use of the opportunities that are available within the industry at the moment?
Manpower, quality manpower, and training and investment in technology. A lot of the licensees earlier on, there were those like Minaj Broadcasting, there were quite a few that for some reason or the other did not get it right. You can't blame them. The knowledge of how to get about a proper licensing regime and a proper content production was weak. We had stations that drafted their junior brothers and their in-laws and cousins to run a station that was meant to be for specialized people. You had some stations, we used to joke at the board meeting, at the management meeting of NBC, that somebody gets a license, he just goes to the motor park in his village, gathers people into the bus and brings them to come and run his station. There was an absence of quality manpower right from the early stages. And a lot of them suffered for it because of two things. One, they did not take into consideration the capital outlay some of them overcapitalized. In some other cases, they had too many staff. A station that can be run by 7 people were run by 32 people of in-laws and relations and brothers. A station, then thirdly, they didn't break into the market of the mafia that controls the adverts. So if you go and set up a station, you have not connected with the advert mafia, all those big names in Lagos in advertising industry, you would sit back and just be doing your transmission and nobody sends an advert to you. And you need adverts to be able to run your station.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in the era of Biodu Shobanjo, I mean, if you just didn't know anything about him, then it's almost like you would never get any advert for your station.
Meanwhile, there are just, maybe let's assume, hypothetically, that the advert agencies and the product manufacturers have 10 billion to spend in their 2023, next year. If they have 10 billion to spend, if they spent 5 billion last year on 600 radio and TV stations, now in 2023, that 10 billion will be shared between 826 radio and TV stations. And you are just one pawn on that chessboard.
Out of the pack.
Out of the pack. So how do you stretch yourself to go and break? What kind of politics, what kind of negotiations, what kind of interventions are you going to do to be able to break into that crowd and get your adverts? The alternative is good quality productions. How can you produce programs that would appeal? And so somebody wakes up and say, oh, I'm not getting adverts. Let me give my station a different niche. So he goes into Pidgin English and sets up a station that is Pidgin, and he suddenly gets a crowd. Then the advert agencies are saying that, okay, this station has huge crowd. Then they begin to invest in that station because all of a sudden, this is the first station that speaks Pidgin English and it's attracting people. Another one says, okay, we're going to do sports. Maybe the sports, young people, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds that are into football and into basketball and athletics will follow this, and tennis. So that's a niche. Unless you begin to carve a niche for yourself, you will just be an open station, no adverts, and after 3, 4, 5 years, you're not breaking even. Meanwhile, the prices of diesel has increased, generator has increased, transportation has increased, your own staff are asking for increase in salary. So if you're not prepared, a lot of the folks that came to get licenses, they wanted to use it as a status symbol. I am a politician. I have a license of radio without doing the homework of what it takes.
We've seen all of that. Now, let's come to the issue of regulation itself. Before I bring Mitchell back in, the National Broadcasting Commission has been in the eye of the storm in recent times. I mean, you would have been conversant with what's going on in terms of licensees that are unable to renew their licenses. Of course, NBC is saying that they should be shut down, while some lawyers and, of course, civil society organizations are saying that, look, broadcast stations play a critical role, and as such, they should not be shut down by the NBC, but there should be a sort of like a bailout for them. What's your thought on that? And then the other aspect is NBC not over-regulating in the midst of the economic challenges that we find ourselves. Shouldn't the NBC, like the CBN, be helping to provide bailout instead of saying that they just want these broadcast stations to be shut down? Because when banks had problems, we saw the Central Bank of Nigeria as a regulator trying to ensure that there was a bailout for these banks.
Well, there are two ways to this, two sides to this coin, including the difference in the coin. You applied for a license knowing fully well you're going to pay for the license fee. You know fully well that after 5 years you have to renew your license. You knew fully well that there's a broadcast code as to what and what not to do. So you went in there voluntarily. So after 5 years, you're not paying your license fees. I mean, it's so elementary. In fact, it's like not paying your tax. You gave yourself the opportunity of getting a license out of thousands that applied. Now, when the time comes to get your renewal, you say you're not making money. Meanwhile, the same you that said you're not making money, you have opened 5 new stations in Port Harcourt, Aba, Kaduna, Gusau, and yet you're not making money. And you are saying that because you're not making money, why would anybody give you bailout when you have expanded from 1 station to 6 stations? I'll give you a simple example of Vision FM. Vision FM started in Abuja. It has Katsina, it has Sokoto, it has Gombe, it has from just one station, and yet they will tell you they're not making money. Liberty TV and radio in Kaduna, they will tell you they're not making money, but they have opened in Abuja, they have opened. So when people tell you they're not making money, please take it with a pinch of salt.
Oh, okay. So Mitchell, what's your contribution to this debate? I mean, do we call for bailout for broadcast stations, considering the role that a lot of Nigerians say they play in national development, social cohesion, in creating public understanding for government, and of course for the private sector?
I didn't expect anything different from Danladi. Having been inside and involved, you won't expect the commission to be waiting for government at every point in time to really run their own operations, given the fact of how they too were set up. Indeed, they also had a mandate to really meet, and they had to find a way to really get themselves going. But beyond all of that is the factor of the Nigerian polity itself, the economics of broadcasting. The fact that these stations started, some of them were guaranteed by banks, and even the banks had problems. So if a bank that gives you a guarantee has a problem, where do you go? And if you look at even the dynamics of really getting to survive, you first have a station survive before you start asking whether they can renew their license. But I think the government also has a responsibility, especially at a time where we are talking about full democratization. If you want to really democratize the polity, freedom of expression is key. And when you start shutting down radio stations, you're taking a bit of that freedom. But that's another discussion entirely. We are in anniversary mood, so it's also good to look at the flowery side of how the business have thrived. But I think that government also has a responsibility towards private stations, especially where the private stations are organized. They have a body. You have the Broadcast Organization of Nigeria, BON. There you have some of the private stations who are members. BON itself can align with government to find a way they can be supported, and that will be helping the society, because what private broadcasting has done in terms of sustaining the Nigerian democracy, you can't even quantify it. It's not even something you can put in terms of naira and kobo. They have taken democracy in this country to a dimension which some of us are comfortable in the fact that there is not only competition, there is of course option, and beyond that there are opportunities for everyone to find a place to express themselves, and technology has also come into the fold. Although, as some will say, why you have this expansion, the global expansion of broadcasting, especially at the private level, there is also the ethical issue, and the ethical issue has become a big question. And nowadays, even there is the what you call social media. It's another form of broadcasting. Many people find it comfortable to have their own stations online. It saves them the cost which they can entertain if they get to build their stations, look for transmitters and all of that. And of course, there are new technology coming in. The direct to home, which depends on satellite, can accommodate so many stations. In that way, they are not looking at diesel costs. They are not looking at some of the problems that affect or challenges that hit major businesses in Nigeria. And I think government needs to consider what it can do for private broadcasting. If nothing else, you can say because of COVID-19, for 2 years, there was really no business and support level was very thin. Government can say, let us at least keep the licensing for that period and look at other ways we can encourage the stations. There are many stations, and of course, that means that the NBC itself can be assured at least of a certain modicum of revenue from the many stations that are blossoming, and not only stations. There are other areas NBC can get to thrive and get the expected revenue to operate. But then the other aspect of regulation, and I think that is key. For the private stations, the way they come under scrutiny, I don't think that same scrutiny is extended to the public stations, and that calls for concern, where every little issue within the private sector of broadcasting is becomes one of penalty and fines and fines and fines. But then when it comes to the station for which all of us pay the tax or pay the money, the kind that sustains them, nobody puts an eye or puts a measure of scrutiny in that level. I think it calls for balancing.
Okay. Before I come to Dr. Danladi Bakwe again, I want you to help us understand the idea of the Nigerian government right now to add social media platforms regulation like Facebook, Twitter, and all of that to NBC. I mean, how is that feasible? We are seeing Minister of Information, Lai Mohammed, during the challenges we had with Twitter as a country, telling us that the NBC going forward is going to be regulating Twitter, regulating Facebook, Instagram, and all of that. Isn't this biting more than the NBC can chew?
That is, it depends on the capacity of what they can accommodate. Depends on how they really want to approach it. The law that sets up NBC gives them at least that overriding cover to get into that frame. I don't know whether far back in 1992 they were thinking the broadcast milieu will be like this now. So if they envisage that, it's a matter of renewing their own operation and seeing which area they can best get the kind of anticipated benefit and results that they need, and focus on that. But it's going to be really, really difficult, especially the online stations, the online radio stations. The other day I was listening, I heard a political party having a radio station. I don't know whether that station was sanctioned or endorsed by the NBC. Online you can tune to a political party's radio station. Those are the kind of things that needs to be regularized. Those are the things that needs to be monitored. But then it's left for the management to sit back and ask themselves the simple question, is that a direction to go, or do we stay with what we have and improve on what we have done over time?
Okay. And I ask you the same thing, Dr. Danladi Bakwe. Let's talk about NBC. What sort of reforms are necessary at the moment? One of the reforms that is being proposed is for it to be regulating the social media. And of course, others are saying that, look, the NBC needs to be totally unpackaged at the moment, and it should not be aligned to the executive. It should be aligned to the parliament, just like the public broadcasting services, NTA, FRC, and this time around they should be answerable to the National Assembly and not to the executive. The reform should not only be targeted at NBC, but ensuring that these platforms all are answerable to the National Assembly, so that we don't have the executive wanting to use it for political vendetta.
A Nigerian attitude needs to change, first of all. The orientation we need is to, first of all, change our perception of our responsibility to national development and national reforms, rather than who does what. If you have a system that works, of recent you have been talking about judges that are facing the National Judicial Council for misdemeanor and misconduct. What makes you think that the National Assembly cannot manipulate the NBC? So that's another issue. On the issue of overregulation and what to do with these social media
regulation, if it should be brought within the purview of the National Broadcasting Commission.
As DG in 1999 to 2002 December, we interacted on so many levels in the international broadcast seminars, National Association of Broadcasters in the US, IBM, all over. We had seminars and seminars about this impending development. So we're very aware at the NBC about what to do. When you do preparations for system change and reforms like this, what you do is, as government did, gather Twitter, tell them that you must flag certain words, you must flag certain items. These are the rules of engagement. In the US, in the UK, in Canada, and to the extreme, there are cases in the Chinese, North Koreans, where when they allow you to operate on social media, there are flags. Things that you would not say that The responsibility is on that body, the platform, Facebook, Twitter. So they are the ones that design what to do to stop the use of certain words, choice of words. Nobody is going to sit back. The American president, George Bush, once had to really get nasty with the American media for glorifying OBL, Osama bin Laden, glorifying hate crime, glorifying David Koresh of Waco, Texas, Reverend Jim Jones. So when you take a seemingly criminal set of society and glorifying them by making them look like they are beyond, as it is we speak, all the issues about bandits, nobody doubts that there are bandits. But when you make them look like superstars, the guy is feeling like the Nigerian government cannot get to me. And he's at home. And you glorify all of those things.
Yeah, but NBC was actually criticized for deciding to want to join BBC to that, considering that the NBC doesn't regulate the BBC. I mean, how did it expect to do that? We've seen the influence of foreign media, especially foreign broadcast media stations, rising in Nigeria with a huge audience, because even our leaders prefer to speak with these foreign broadcast agencies like VOA, Deutsche Welle, and BBC and all of that when they go outside the country rather than even speaking with us domestically. So again, if they are deciding to point to us the mirror the way it is, isn't it exactly the way we are?
Sumner, everything you're doing in Arise TV, probably Channels has done it in a different way. AIT has been doing it before you came on the scene. It's a matter of treatment. There's something we call treatment. You and I can start a story. I can do this same program, Arise interview, on another channel, and it will be the same content but with a different coloration. In broadcasting, your choice of words, your arrangement of logic, your semantics, even the presenter's semiotics, his body language, all speak to that program. There's a way you present a material that makes it look like beautiful or makes it look like we're above the law. Now, let me tell you something about the BBC and most of those other stations. When I was Director General of NBC, they applied for licenses to operate FM stations.
Yeah, I remember.
And I said to them that, I said to them that, go and allow Nigerians to open their own FM stations in England. Sumner, if we go today to England and go and take, when Prince Charles was getting married to Lady Diana, and the British tabloids said he had a woman friend called Camilla Bowles, and it became like a scandal. If I was a media organization in England, I could take that and make a mountain out of that. Even the Meghan issue with Prince Harry, I can blow it up in such a way that even the British government will be embarrassed. So it has to do with treatment, how you treat a story. As I speak today, would you allow NTA to go to the ghettos in England, in Bronx in New York? Would you allow them to go to Brixton and go and show the disabled people and the underprivileged in England and put on BBC?
Well, these are controversial issues.
Absolutely.
Okay, but very quickly before we go, I want you to touch on the issues of newspaper houses in Nigeria beginning to own television houses. I mean, very quickly before I bring Mitchell in, what do you say to that?
I was part of a workshop to train a few members of a newspaper to transit to TV. What they did at that newspaper house was they just took all the news staff and just picked about 12 of them and sent them for training. As we speak, Arise tried to move some stuff from this day to this thing. Some have worked, others are disasters. With all due respect, some have worked, others are disasters. It doesn't work all the time. You don't look for, and I think because Arise is a success, every other newspaper wants to move from newspaper to TV. And my friend and brother, Michel, wrote for Guardian for centuries. He was editor of Guardian Express. He just, how many people read Nigerian newspapers? I don't think there's any newspaper that runs 50,000 copies in Nigeria today. I don't think so, print run. But when you appear on TV, 3 million people around Lagos, especially on a station like Arise. So I had friends who were editors of newspapers. The day they moved to TV, the ladies on their street started hailing them.
So it's a different ballgame. Okay, Mitchell, as we try to round off this conversation, I just want you to talk about professionalism. Going forward, how do we ensure that this industry, both from the perspective of the proprietors of the institution and then the regulator, NBC, and then, of course, broadcast professionals were able to ensure that this broadcast industry is one that works for everyone. I mean, so that we don't have chaos and then consistent challenges like you had raised, I mean, earlier on with the constant punitive measures like some would like to describe of the NBC, providing fines, sanctions, 1 million, 5 million every now and then when things happen. How do we have a system that works for everyone?
Thank you. Let me just take a cue from what Danladi said about the transition from the print to the electronics. I think it's a matter of knowing exactly what both areas entail, and if you get to understand it and you can really apply yourself, there is always the advantage, even if you have a good knowledge of the print. Indeed, some of the best writers, when they come on the screen and they can match or meet the basic tenets of broadcasting, they be like angels. I mean, people see them from a different fold. And I think it's an experience that can work. And at a time when we are looking at multimedia strength, you must be in a position to operate at all platforms. And that makes you complete journalist. But coming to the issue of professionalism, you are first a professional if you believe in the ethics of the business, if you keep to the ethos, the ethos, and some will even take it down to the etymological dimensions of how to become a broadcast journalist. I think the basic thing is for you to copy those who have excelled. What did they do to excel? Excellence, they say, is a habit. And if it's a habit, then there are principles that guide such a behavior. And you need to really look hard at all those who want to really give professionalism to the business, to carry it to another level. I think they pave the way, they become the pathfinders, and at a time when we are looking at 30 years of private broadcasting, plus the years in the past of public service broadcasting, I think after 60, we should be in a position to compete with the world. Of course, technology has helped us, and technology is increasing on a daily basis. As I said at my initial comments, content is key, and for you to provide good content, you must be totally professional. And if you give the people what they want and they can see what they want, as Victor Hugo tells you, the style is the man, and of course the style is the medium, and people go for the style because the style brings out the appeal, and appeal is what people admire. And if they admire what you give and what you stand for and the kind of asset you bring, you can always have the emotional investment from people. Of course, eyeball is critical, but beyond the eyeballs also is the fact of being your own self at every time, understanding the business.
All right. Well, that's why you're described as the master yourself, and of course you've always run this Master Sports International that helps to create content that has kept a lot of Nigerians very happy in the area of sports. We must thank you so much, Mitchell Obi. He is the Africa president of the International Sports Press Association, a veteran journalist in different aspects. You've helped us to understand what's going on within the broadcast industry.
Don't make me look old, Sambu, I'm not the veteran.
Okay, well, of course.
I'm not a veteran.
Well,
I'm still involved in the business.
Yes, okay. Well, that's interesting to know. And of course, our own former Director General of the National Broadcasting Commission, Dr. Danladi Bako, who is also a journalist of repute, well known, not just within Nigeria, but of course across Africa. You've always helped us to understand these issues within the industry. And of course, as we celebrate the regulation of the broadcast industry in Nigeria for 30 years, we just hope that in the next 30 years, the industry will continue to work stronger. Well, that's how it's been for this edition of the Arise interview. You'll join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, goodbye and thank you for watching. I'm Somna Sambo.